Hello, my name's Harry Kazianis. I'm the managing editor of The National Interest. Today I have the honor of speaking with Richard Fontaine. Richard is the president of the Center for a New American Security, or CNAS. We're going to talk about a broad range of topics today. Richard, to start out a little bit, obviously the press there's been a lot of chatter about everything going on with ISIS, Syria, American bombings, American involvement. Wanted to sort of get your quick reaction. How do you think the president's doing? What do you think of the overall strategy that's been announced to handle ISIS? What's your reaction to the situation?
Yeah, I think it's rare that in an operation you can both achieve or attempt to achieve your interest-based objectives and also values, kind of humanitarian ones. But I think they really converge here because you have a truly brutal terrorist group that now occupies territory bigger than the United Kingdom and is the richest terrorist group that we know of in history. That is posing an eventual threat to Americans abroad and probably at home, a regional threat to stability, certainly of Iraq and Syria, but also potentially to other countries in the region. And then the humanitarian aspect of this is compelling as well. So I think the president is right to intervene and to take military action against ISIS. I would disaggregate to some degree the strategy in Iraq and the strategy in Syria. The strategy in Iraq, at least theoretically, you can see how this could become successful with ground forces, either the Sunnis that are pulled away, Shia militias, the Iraqi security forces, the Kurdish Peshmerga, all of which would fight ISIS. In Syria, it's harder to figure out because we're talking about training up to 5,000 moderate Syrian rebels over the next year. And they will presumably be targeted not just by ISIS but also by Assad's Air Force. And they are going to have to go up against up to 30,000 ISIS fighters when their real objective is to topple the Assad regime. So how the Syria strategy comes together is still very unclear to me.
Interesting. So sticking with ISIS for a moment, talking a little bit about the president's motivations. He talked a lot about, I think the exact wording was, to degrade and destroy ISIS. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this and sort of polling colleagues and friends. How does one define victory against like an Al-Qaeda or an ISIS? I mean, these aren't the type of military battles where there'll be a victory or there'll be a definitive town or capital taken. How does one define sort of victory or some sort of broad victory when you're fighting a non-state actor such as this, or terrorism in general?
Right. Well, I think there's several ways that several objectives with respect to ISIS that are different than Al-Qaeda. I mean, Al-Qaeda at the end of the day was a threat to the U.S. homeland and to Americans and our allies abroad. But they weren't trying to establish a state. They weren't seizing territory. They weren't conducting overt business transactions. They weren't radiating instability throughout the Middle East the way that ISIS is doing today. And so, I don't think utter destruction of the movement can be something that we aim for in the very near term, but certainly reducing to the greatest extent possible the threat to Americans at home or abroad that ISIS would pose. Reducing their scope both territorially and economically in terms of the power that they're able to bring, and therefore the radiating instability that's coming out of that region, and eliminating their ability to really keep Iraqi politics in a very unstable way, which means things like getting them out of Mosul, the second biggest city in Iraq, where they occupy the city, which is easier said than done, perhaps, because the United States, being limited mostly to air power, you can't get them out of major cities through air power alone.
I think those are good points. So I want to turn a little bit to my favorite subject, which is all things Asia. Now, looking at the broad pivot or rebalance, as it's called, to Asia, obviously the United States has been sort of focused over the last 6 months to a year on a lot of other different crises. Mm-hmm. We have the situation in Ukraine, Syria, ISIS, all of these major sort of international problems. Give us your sense of where the pivot in rebalance is today, how it's going, and maybe over the end of President Obama's term, where you think it could head. We obviously have a presidential summit. President Obama's going to Beijing pretty soon. Give us your take.
Well, there's essentially three main pillars of the rebalance to Asia. There's the economic, the diplomatic, and the security. On the economic side, the big prize there is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which, you know, we will see where this goes. In part, that turns on the Congress here at home and on Japanese domestic politics. And I think that if TPP, if we're able to get TPP, then we've given some real meaning to the rebalance, not only in economic terms, because in Asia so much of foreign policy is economic policy, is trade policy. If TPP fails, then I think that really damages the strategic picture for the United States in Asia. Again, not only in economic ways, but damages the prestige of the United States, and at a time when other countries in the region, China, India, and others, are signing trade deals all over the place. On the military side, it's, you know, there's something there. That we have a rotational Marine presence in Darwin, Australia. We have agreed with the Philippines on rotational base access in the Philippines, although that's now tied up in court. We've begun making some more moves with the Vietnamese. We have littoral combat ships in Singapore. Now that doesn't add up to, you know, a gigantic military presence where there previously had not been one, but it's steps in the right direction. So I think if we continue to make steps in the right direction on all three of the pillars, then we'll be in good shape. The problem will be at senior policy level attention, because it is going to be the case that the United States has to focus on the Middle East, and now it is clear the United States also has to focus on Europe. So we will have to allocate time, attention, and resources to Asia while we're focused on these other things. I think part of doing that is ruthless prioritization of your foreign policy goals. So I mean, at least in retrospect, the large amount of diplomatic time, attention, and capital given to the Middle East peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians could have been allocated in other ways.
No, those are good points. So speaking with allocation of resources, let's turn to maybe military resources. Over the last few years, the U.S. military has gone through sequestration. There's been a lot of talk about damages to readiness, training, things of that nature, cuts in R&D. Give us a sense of where you think the preparedness of the U.S. military is, thinking about all of the different possible challenges that you brought up. You know, we're trying to rebalance to Asia. We're trying to maybe give more resources to NATO. We have different problems in the Middle East with ISIS. Is the U.S. military, where it stands today, have enough resources to carry out all the tasks that it might be asked to handle?
Well, there's two, I think, separate questions. Can it carry out the tasks it's handling today? And I think the answer is yes. I mean, it is going after ISIS. It is doing, you know, the Navy is doing things in Asia. Will it be able to carry out all the tasks we ask for it in the future? That is unclear for two reasons. One, because those tasks are unclear, but the other is the potential reimposition of sequestration level cuts in 2016. And this is something that everybody says they want to avoid, but everyone said that before sequestration went into effect. If sequestration comes back into effect, if those levels of cuts come back into effect in 2016, then I think you will see a real crunch and a real mismatch between readiness and military resources and the tasks that are being given. My worry is that Congress won't act until there's a perceived crisis, like there's a mission that the president would like the military to undertake, and the military comes back and says, we can't do that to the extent that you want us to, because the cuts have been so deep that it's affected our readiness. And only then will the Congress respond. Now, I hope that the Congress will preempt that by acting sooner, but I don't think anyone has ever lost a bet recently in betting against congressional action.
This is true. So let's try to sort of leave this on a positive note. One of the things I think CNAS really does extremely well is promote sort of a bipartisan vision for foreign policy. Obviously have on staff Republicans, Democrats, people from lots of different administrations. I know yourself and others have been writing about sort of working towards maybe some sort of bipartisan consensus, which I think you can talk in broad terms. Going back years ago, there was in some broad frames, but it seems like that's maybe dropped off. Maybe because of the Iraq War, maybe because of the War on Terror. Lots of different things sort of get into that mix. Where do you see that today? Do you see members of Congress, administration officials from different parties sort of getting together and sort of talking about these issues more? Where do you think that consensus can sort of go maybe in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think the hyper-partisanship that characterizes our politics in general has also been, has really crept into foreign policy. It's never been the case that politics has stopped at the water's edge. It's always been a political thing. But the level of partisanship, I think, is higher now than at any time in the last few decades. In addition to that, you have these sort of raging debates that are starting to happen within the parties. And so, you clearly see this on the Republican side between those who favor a much more restrained American international posture with less foreign aid, smaller military, but smaller defense budget, less intervention overseas, and those who favor, a greater extension of American leadership in the world. And on the Democratic side, you have something mirroring that. It may not be quite as pronounced right now, but you have this bit of an unholy alliance between some kind of on the left and some on the sort of the right who would like to retrench. And then you've got folks in the middle who are from different political parties, but that are essentially internationalists. I think there's an opportunity to carve out some bipartisan space around a robust American internationalism that would support the defense budget and the foreign affairs budget and American engagement abroad, whether it's on trade or diplomatic or anything else, but that does it in a smart way that avoids the kind of overextension and overcommitment that I think a lot of people fear, but also doesn't find the answer in kind of a let's return to America and just do nation building at home. That says, look, if we're going to be prosperous and peaceful at home and free at home, then we've got to be active abroad, and that there's a specific connection between those two things.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll have to leave it there. My name is Harry Kazianis, and I've been speaking with Richard Fontaine, the president of the Center for a New American Security.